Hi, everybody, and welcome to Friday Night Flock Talk. I'm Robin Sullivan of the Leather Elves. It's good to be here. And I have, last week we had a memorial that we put up at the end of the session. And I asked Nick if we could put it up again because I didn't really say anything about it. And I just wanted you guys to take a minute, those of you that knew Jeannie or even those of you that didn't, just to take a minute and maybe tomorrow her memorial is tomorrow, her celebration of life. And if you can't be there in Florida with her, then just take a couple minutes maybe tomorrow. She was an incredible aviculturist, someone that contributed so much and really celebrated everyone everyone she knew. If you had the littlest success and you told Jeannie about it, you got, great praise and that's great. And I'm so happy for you. And so just maybe tomorrow at some time during your day, just take a couple minutes and think about Jeannie. So with that said, um, I need to do my usual announcements. You can like and follow us on Facebook. That way you get information about flash sales and if we do a pop-up event, something like that, you'll find out about that. You'll get notice of that. You'll also get notice when we go live on Friday nights. You can follow us on Instagram as well and subscribe to our YouTube channel. I know we have a couple of folks who listen or who view us on YouTube, so welcome to you all as well. Tonight, I'm really excited. We've got a dear friend as a guest and someone who has contributed quite a bit to our world, our avian world, and conservation as well. So it's my pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Donald Brightsmith. Hey, Don, how's it going?
Pretty good. Great to be back.
Good. I'm going to read your bio. It might, we only have an hour, but we're going to go with this anyway. Um, Dr. Brightsmith is a professor of ecosystem health in the Department of Veterinary Pathobiology and the Schubert Center for Avian Health at Texas A&M University. He holds a PhD in zoology from Duke University, a master's in wildlife ecology from the University of Arizona, and a bachelor's of science in natural resources from Cornell University. And he is an author of over 75 scholarly works. His interest in wild birds started at a young age with binoculars in the backyard and has led him to projects, collaborations, and teaching in the Peru, Costa Rica, Brazil, Colombia, Mexico, Guatemala, Nicaragua, Indonesia, and throughout the US. His specialties are tropical ecology, ornithology, and wildlife conservation, especially topics related to wild and captive parrots. He has worked on parrots in Peru since 1993 and ran the Tambopata Macaw Project, now the Macaw Society. I'm not even going to attempt the Spanish. Sociedad Pro Guacamayo. How is that? Oh, there it is. There's a t-shirt. Since 1999. His research has focused on a wide variety of topics, including parrot conservation, clay-lick use, parrot reintroduction, nesting, movements, habitat use, and more. He also works closely with leading aviculturists in industry and conducts research on diets of captive and wild parrots, parrot enrichment, yay, and wild red-crowned parrots in Texas. As an advisor to aviculture, government, and private parrot conservation projects, he is helping put his knowledge to work for the benefit of wild and captive parrots. Don't you
Yeah,
love
she didn't
having your
get the
bio?
memo on trying to summarize that, but that's okay.
Right. I wanted to get it all out there.
There
I
you go.
needed to fill a little bit. So,
The
all
funny
right.
thing is that tonight's topic wasn't on that list at all.
Yes, it was. Wait, wasn't it?
No,
No?
naturalized parrots not in there. So
All right. So I'm going to put a little note to myself, add to Dawn's bio.
yeah, right. Another like 5 minutes worth.
There we go. Okay. So we'll have to add. So next time, you guys, if you're listening and Dawn's going to be the guest, just put a couple of more minutes on. It'll be good.
There you go.
So, what are we talking about tonight?
Whatever I get asked about, but what I've heard is we're talking about naturalized parrots. Maybe if we could get that first slide up, it would make it clearer. Um, so I was asked to write chapters in a book edited by Stephen Pruitt Jones, who's known for studying the monk parakeets in Chicago. He's the guy who knows the most about those. And he said, I'm writing a book about naturalized parrots. And naturalized parrots means those parrots that live places where they're not native. So a lot of times people will call these exotics or non-natives or invasive, lots of different words that we can talk about more. But basically, I was asked to write two chapters. The, my grad student took one, I took the other, we co-authored them both. That was one of the hardest things I've had to write in a long time. We used about 250 different references to try and get an idea of what was going on with these birds. And I came up with the Kursi, the kind of flaky part of the title there, the world's most colorful colonizers. That was my first contribution to the book. So
I like it. So, I I guess you kind of explained, that they're parrots that are in places that live in places where they're not from. That sounds like a horrible sentence,
not
but,
not native. There we go.
there you go. So what is there criteria for saying, "Okay, this species is now a naturalized parrot?" Is there a criteria for that? This wasn't we hadn't talked about this, but it came
Right.
up.
No, it's a good one. So if you have a non-native parrot, it means it's flying around. Like if your pet escaped and flies around outside, you got a scarlet macaw flying around in Chicago, that's just a non-native parrot, but it's not naturalized. So a naturalized species is when you get a species that gets in there and starts to breed at a high enough rate that the population is growing.
Okay.
So it's self-sustaining to growing populations. That's when they really start to be considered naturalized.
Okay. So you mentioned some other terms too, the invasive. Is there a difference or are those just other terms that we use?
Yeah, so in our world of politically correct culture and culture wars, etc., there are certain words that are positive, there are certain words that are negative, and there are certain words
Mhm.
that are try to be neutral. Pruitt Jones was very specific in choosing the title of the book. He said naturalized. Naturalized has a clear definition. It means they're living there, they're reproducing, they're growing, but it doesn't say if they're a positive thing or a negative thing. Invasive always has a negative connotation. That's like your slant. As soon as you call something invasive, you're saying that it's having bad impacts.
Mhm.
So that's one of the big uh, differences there.
Okay. And I mean, so naturalized, are we talking? So is there an issue? We're talking about now birds that are where they don't truly belong, regardless of how they have arrived there. Um, is there a problem with this?
Okay, well, first, good point. How did they get there? They got there because people moved them, and then they were either let out of the cages on purpose or escaped on purpose, and now we have them. So what are the problems? And that really, really varies a huge amount. Um, if you happen to live in a southern city where there are monk parakeets, you may have heard the electric companies don't like monk parakeets. Or actually, it doesn't even have to be southern, all the way up to Chicago, New York
Yeah.
area. Um, they build big stick nests often around transformers. They cause the transformers to overheat. They kind of burst into flames. Since the nests are made of sticks, you've got flames, sticks, fire that burns your electricity system and causes power outages and damage to the system. So that for the
Mhm.
US, that's the biggest impact that we have here on the mainland.
Okay. So it's a problem. Now you said in the US that's the biggest problem. Um, Other places, are we facing challenges in other places?
So once you get outside the US, the biggest issue is with the bird that's actually on the cover of that, the ringneck parakeet. and the ringneck parakeet is basically all throughout Europe, and as we get towards the end, we'll talk a little bit about Hawaii, but it's throughout Europe, and the populations are growing so fast that it's really scaring a lot of the European biologists and European researchers.
Okay. Megan has a question. She says, "Aren't they seeing some species starting to migrate further north each year?"
A lot of species, yes. Most of your parrots aren't migratory, so probably not. They're not moving in big numbers.
Mhm. Okay.
So not a
Um,
not a super big issue.
okay. So if let's kind of switch back maybe as far as what so we've established it's an issue. It can be an issue. They can be an issue. What which ones are, in your opinion, or have they figured out, are the worst as far as being a problem?
Okay. So the kind of the worst are in the US, it's monk parakeets. In the rest of the world, it's um, ringnecks. But what's really interesting is there's like 52 different species flying around out there. But two of them account for almost all the known negative impacts.
Huh. So, when you say there are 50 different species, roughly 50 different species out there, are we talking ones and twos and or are we talking, so by definition, we're talking about birds that are thriving, so to speak.
For the most
Uh,
part, yeah. When we talk about 52, I don't think all 52 are established. Can you pop up that next slide for the map of the US? Um, that's the world one. There should be a US one floating around in there. Um, in the in the US, what we've got is if you look throughout the southern states, you can see how many different species have been recorded. And in Dade County, Florida, there have been like 36 different species. Um,
wow. That,
there are 36 different species have been seen. I've seen a bunch of species in the few times I've visited. Go to Southern California, the numbers are pretty good too. There's like at least about 15 or so flying around in parts of Los Angeles and Southern California. So, and
mhm,
of the ones that really are breeding, there are Amazons out there in Dade County, Florida. I saw a nesting pair of blue and yellow macaws. The macaws in Miami are pretty well known, thanks to some aviculturists talking about them down there. So yeah,
mhm,
we're seeing quite a few species around the U.S. Again, mostly in the South. Um, and then, of course, the Quaker parakeet is the classic. You can see the map over here on the left hand side that shows where monk parakeets have been recorded, and they're all over lots of different areas, and they
mhm.
account for 40% of all of the non-native parrot sightings in the U.S.
Wow. So, Lori McFarland, just to answer your question, monk parakeets are
Oh, sorry.
Quaker
Yeah,
parrots. Yeah, no, it's just a lot of people know them as Quakers. It's interesting to me, and I'm going off script here, Don.
no
The
problem.
When you look at that map, the center is pretty bare,
Yes.
um, which to me is counterintuitive. It doesn't seem like, it seems like that would be a place where they could find food.
Okay. So you've hit on a complex issue, and one of the ones that made writing this chapter so interesting and so difficult at the same time. Um, and that was these parrots only can survive in certain types of landscapes. And the problem with the heartland is that you have big areas of agriculture, but there's only a few crops, and they can't live all year on just a cornfield or a wheat field. They need a diversity of foods that's available at a diversity of times of year. So if you look at that map, it's not a coincidence that almost all the central areas, except for South
Mhm.
Texas, are around big cities.
Yeah.
You can plot the largest cities in the United States, and they're all purple.
Huh.
Los Angeles, Miami, New York, and the whole metropolitan area that goes from Philly up to Massachusetts. You've got Chicago on there. Um, and in that's and in that way, these were original importation sites. So
Mhm.
the birds were this is where they were being imported to, and a lot of birds they think actually escaped during the importation process,
Okay.
or they were became agricultural centers. And when the birds got out, especially in the South, they were able to survive better. So there's a lot of history there. And the other thing about a big city is, what type of plants do we like to plant? Ones that
Oh,
flower, ones
yeah.
that fruit, ones that keep leaves and things year round, especially in the South.
Mhm.
So what we've done is we've brought the exotic species. We've brought the exotic plants from the tropics and from other areas that they need to survive and planted them around our houses. And since there's every yard's got something different, there's this great diversity. And now you got these parrots flying around these cities consuming um, consuming these plant resources.
So, I mean, that's a whole, this is a whole nother evening's discussion about it says a lot about nutrition. It says a lot about, parrots' dietary requirements. When we're talking about what are we feeding our parrots, well, when you just look, you have to just look to what's happening here where they're not necessarily where they don't belong. And they're still finding that diversity.
Yep. Yeah. And they're
Okay.
looking
And
for diversity. Yep.
yeah.
And so one of the interesting things now, if you flip it around, though, there are many places where wild parrots are an agricultural pest.
Mhm.
So how does that work?
Yeah.
How that works is they live in the native forests, usually around breeding season, and then they fly out to the agricultural areas. They kind of migrate out to the agricultural areas in the non-breeding season, pound the crops, and then go back to their forest. But you have big areas of native habitat that are supporting big populations of parrots that then move into the agricultural areas, hammer them, and then move back out again. But in our
Okay.
systems, the places where they're breeding are big cities that have a diversity of foods anyhow and less
Mhm.
seasonal change. And when your ag is good, your forests are usually your cities have enough food. So there's no reason to pick up and migrate out into a cornfield or a wheat field when you can
Right.
stay home and just eat the good foods that are around. So the whole system is completely different between the wild areas and the native areas. And that was one of the things I kind of discovered in the writing of this chapter. It's like, why is it in one area it works and the other area it doesn't?
Right. And, so, I mean, it's kind of I hate to throw this term out there, but it's kind of evolutionary that we are creating this opportunity for them, by what we're planting, what we're importing into our gardens and things like that. And so we've got it's I mean, it's almost a symbiotic, well, not really. But do you
So,
see what I'm
so what's
saying?
happening is we're creating the habitat, and one of the things I don't know is even if it's on our list is if you look carefully at these non-native parrots, almost 100% of them are living within what we would call urban or suburban areas.
Yeah.
They very rarely in the US, almost never, and globally, it's very rare that they will leave their city areas and really go out into native habitats. Even
Huh.
in South Texas, where they're only like 100 kilometers north of their native habitat, they stay in the cities. And they
Wow.
just don't go out into the. So it's funny, there's beautiful protected areas right along the Rio Grande that to me look like perfect parrot habitat. But the parrots are in Olivera Park, they're in the soccer parks and people's front yards and backyards, and they're ignoring the protected areas.
Right. Yeah, Janice says Quakers take advantage of your backyard bird feeders. So
So
yeah.
so in the north, they actually think that bird feeders are a huge part of the success of these birds. So in the low season of food, and Chicago is going to have a serious low season, New York, these birds
Mhm.
will find bird feeders, and that kind of gets them through the tough times. They go back and hang out in their nice big stick nest where they stay warm. and that gets them through till next spring.
So for these the ones that are former pets, it's all the sunflower seeds that we never gave them. So it's actually
Right,
our
there you
fault
go,
that
exactly, yeah.
this is happening.
And
Uh,
actually, that's a weird issue right there because former pets do badly as far for the most part. So actually, in the U.S., once wild parrot importation dropped off, the number
mhm.
of new uh, species of parrots being added in the wild in the U.S. dropped off too. Your
Do
wild
they?
imports
I mean,
are much better.
do they know why that is? I mean, is it
Well, let's
that what
see.
they're?
If you were raised in the Amazon rainforest, you'd do fine. But if I took you right now and dropped you
Mhm.
in my field site in southeastern Peru, you wouldn't do
Yeah,
too good.
it's
So if
true.
you've lived in a cage your whole life and now all of
Mhm.
a sudden at age whatever, I mean, you look like you're maybe 25 or so these days, we drop
Little
you
bit
out
higher.
in the middle of the rainforest at an adult age. It's tough, and these birds who've been pampered, I look at my Amazon parrot and and we laugh about it. It's like, "So what do you think if she got out?" She's like, "She'd be looking for home real fast
Yeah,
because there's just or she'd just get hammered by a predator that she never saw coming."
right.
She'd
I mean,
spot that garbage truck. She'd watch that garbage truck the whole way down the street, but that hawk that came up in front of her, she'd be like, "Hey, dude."
Diane from Long Island says the naturalized parakeets, monk parakeets that she sees are so healthy and magnificent. And I've
Yep,
seen them, and she's right. I mean, they're stunning.
yep.
I have to
They're flying
admit,
around, they're eating well. Yep.
yeah. I mean, I knew they were, everybody's known they were in Brooklyn for a long time. But I was out at the Long Island Parrot Expo and I was staying in Freeport
Hmm.
and
Ah,
I
okay.
walked out in the morning and there they were. And I was so
Oh, sweet.
surprised. Yeah.
So
It
again,
was very cool.
Freeport is not exactly a native forested area. I mean, that's
Mm,
serious suburbia, heavy duty
yeah.
New York style suburbia, and the birds doing fine, going from one yard to another, finding the plants that have got what they need.
Yeah, and Michelle's in LA, and she said in Pasadena,
Oh God.
she sees him, and that her cockatoo, likes to talk to, the red-crowned, Amazons,
Yep.
and she said, and then I believe you're right, Michelle, that, Quakers are illegal to own as pets in California. I know, we go through that all the time in the Northeast, and people trying to say that you can't own them because there are naturalized populations of them. So it's kind of tough. Um,
Nick, can you
but
cue that the Quaker map?
the
There's a Quaker one in there that just has the not that one. There's a where they're legal and where they're not. The red and green map.
okay,
There we go.
there we go.
So, yeah,
And
there and I don't know if this is May 2019, it could have changed a bit, so don't take this as gospel, but it does show you, um, the map of where these birds are considered illegal to own. And
mm,
what's really interesting here, and I actually, spoke to the Invasive Species Commission in Wisconsin as part of this, uh but what's really interesting here and what's driving this is the fear that these birds are going to destroy agriculture.
yeah,
Um, and so what I've found, and I did look really carefully at agriculture, and what I found in the reading globally, and again, you've got to pick through it and you got to find out. You can't believe what they're saying at the end of the article. You got to really, really look at what the data are showing. And what the data
yeah,
show is that they're only having an impact on agriculture within maybe 4 kilometers is about 2 miles or so, 2.5 miles.
mhm,
They're only willing to go about 2.5 miles from urban and suburban areas to get out into agricultural areas. So
right,
your one of the places that got hammered was a pick your own. I don't know if it was blueberries or raspberries or whatever. There was a pick your own place, and they figured that they lost 20% of their crop, 15 or 20% of the crop, and they were upset about that. But again, it
Mhm.
was right on the edge of the city where the Parrots were established. So this idea that they're going to empty the breadbasket of the United States in these massive mechanized farms, not going to happen. But these
Right.
more diverse little farm areas, pick your own, et cetera, right near the city, those ones
Mhm.
are at risk in some ways.
Yeah, up here in Maine, we've got that red up in the corner there, and yeah, I mean, I think that's probably the driving force there as well, that there's a lot of, like, agritourism, that happens, and yeah, so that's
Interesting
probably why
vein.
that
I that would be challenging even for monks to do really, especially now. And the other thing the point I made to Wisconsin is the birds that now, first of all, there aren't that many monk parakeets being moved around, so they're not being moved around in big colonies. And if they're ex pets or they're pets, they don't have the survival skills. So the
Yeah,
chances of getting enough of them out at once that have the survival skills in a place like
mhm,
Maine these days
yeah.
just isn't going to happen.
I barely have the survival skills myself, so, I
For
do
Maine, yeah,
understand
no,
that,
I hear you.
it's
Uh,
kinda rough. Um,
so one
so
thing to think about to connect with people is that we're talking in general today about the Pirates of Telegraph Hill. I mean,
yeah,
because those are like the most famous naturalized parrots, and that's pretty much what they are.
mhm. Um, so Janice says her friend says that some of the conures tear up the fruit trees in her yard, but she's never seen a Quaker touch the fruit. All right.
Yep, yep, yep.
It makes
Hi,
sense.
Janice. Yeah, believe it.
So globally, so we've looked at the US. What are we talking about globally? Like where are they established? Is it the same type of, urban
Okay,
areas?
let's look at the big map so we can see what countries have got naturalized parrots in them. So this is horribly incomplete, but used in part of the book. Um, at least 47 species have naturalized populations, and now we're actually talking about populations that are doing well and kind of self-sustaining. Um, there are over 40 populations recorded of ringnecks and monks. I'm sorry, and Quakers. So those are the two most common for
Okay.
certain. But also, I've seen plenty of naturalized parrots in Brazil, Peru, Venezuela. So they're all over in South America. And there it's really funky because you'll have native species that are native to the nations that I mentioned, Peru, Brazil, Venezuela. But because of part of the illegal trade, they'd be brought together for sale. They get brought into the cities and then they're either escape or let go or government bust or whatever. And now they're established in the big cities in these countries and they live in the cities, but they're because they're expats, or sorry, they're released birds from the illegal trade. And I was driving along with parrot biologist friend of mine in Venezuela, and we're driving along. All of a sudden, we come into the city, and in the middle of the city, there are severe macaws. And I look at her, I'm like, these aren't native. I know we're in Venezuela, but these are not native. These are ex pet trade birds or ex illegal trade birds. And she looks at me, she goes, yeah, you're right. And she gave me the story of these birds that had been trapped, whatever, blah, blah. There was a specific story about them being released. And you can spot
Wow.
the behavior. If you once you know what
Yeah.
you're looking for, you're like, yeah, not native.
So Michelle has a question. Do the native and the naturalized ever flock together?
Okay, so that's a weird question. No, it's a great question. Um, the answer is strange because the biggest problem is the habitats are so different. Your native, your native. Now, if you have birds that live right around the city that natively, and maybe a few of them come in and out of the city, and and a pet or a bird escapes in that city, chances are they'll join up with them, and then off they go. However, when you have like in Puerto Rico, so far, all of the non-native parrots are in the cities and the suburban and the built-up areas. Puerto Rican parrot, the native one, is out in the middle of the forest, and there's no evidence of those two starting to move together. Thankfully, because that's where some of my concerns actually lie about. impacts is if you start getting mixing between the natives and these non-natives.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that would definitely be an issue. So, all right, we've talked about, the power lines and what are some of the other problems, Don? I mean,
Actually, I
financially.
want to bring up one thing on the power lines.
Sure.
The power lines are really funny. So I looked at all the studies I could find that actually tried to quantify, because it's one thing to say they're bad. Another thing is to try
Yeah.
and put a number on it. And they actually found that in a year, Florida Power and Light had to fix $600,000 worth of damages from monk parakeets. It cost them $600,000 for monk
Okay.
parakeets. That's a lot of money.
Yeah.
Until you realize Florida Power and Light's profit in that same year was
Mhm.
$871 million.
Yeah. So
So
in the grand scheme,
the drop caused by monk parakeets in the worst part of the country for monk parakeet damage was 0.067%. So just over one, it's not even a half of a percent. It's a tenth of a half of, yeah. So it's 0.07%, or something like 15 cents a share was what
yeah.
so when you zoom out at all, if you zoom in, $600,000 is a lot of money. You zoom out, it's completely trivial.
Right.
And the way that I like to think about that is, okay, so is there a value added side here? Um, is there an upside to being able, Robin, your eyes lit up when you said you walked out of the hotel, you looked up
Right.
and there were beautiful, bright green, healthy monk parakeets flying around.
Mhm.
As a society, is that worth a drop of 0.067% profits by the electric company, which is a private entity?
Yeah, I think those of us here who are listening and talking to you about this
Right.
would say absolutely. I mean, I remember going to Galveston, during a parrot festival to see the monk parakeets,
Yep.
and it was this big de everybody was so excited, and, I think in terms of education and teaching, I think that's important, but I think that the guy that had to take the bucket truck out to fix the lines would, disagree with all of us, and I'm sure, despite the fact that it is a drop in the bucket when it comes to when you look at percentages, the corporations, unless they're looking for a feel-good mission, are not gonna be out there saving these naturalized parrots.
Yep. And the one thing that I couldn't find that I really was wanted to was how much money do squirrels cost the electric companies nationwide? And they're a native species, but I bet you that the squirrel damages are just off the chart. Yeah, galahs. So okay, now we're getting out into other areas not native to Tasmania. There's also a lot of introduced parrots in New Zealand, because a lot of your Australian parrots do well in New Zealand.
Mhm.
And I had to look at quite a bit of literature in the Australian, New Zealand, also non-native species within Australia. um, and then, so okay, so here's my big pet peeve. Can I tell you my big pet peeve?
As long as you don't
Okay.
make Jane upset. Jane's over there. She's watching from
Okay.
Australia, so
Got it. Now, my big pet peeve is this one. They say you read anything about invasive parrots, and they'll tell you there's a human disease risk almost every time. These are a human disease. They're a noise. They're noisy. Many of you
mhm,
know that firsthand. Um, they make a mess, and there's a human disease aspect. So the noise and mess, the complaints are really rare in the outside, and I've never heard them quantified at any number. It's just people say the public doesn't like them because they're noisy. It's like there's a lot of things we don't like because they're noisy. Doesn't mean we have to go count killing things. But the
right.
disease aspect is the one that drives me crazy. There is not a single case of a naturalized parrot flying around outside in the outside that has ever gotten
Mhm.
a single person sick.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
yet every time they talk, they want to sell you on exotic parrot on invasive parrots. They throw in the fear factor of that, and that just
and I love the fact that you flipped to invasive when we're talking about this, and that's exactly what it is. It's, you know, people are going along and it's all like, "Oh, they're, beautiful birds and they're this and they're that," and then suddenly they're bad and invasive, so we need to get rid of them, and it's I mean, what amazes me is, yes, there's an outcry when when, a Quaker nest is taken down or a colony is taken down or something like that, but it's not, it's not as outrageous to people, and I feel like it should be. I feel like we kind of need to make some comments about that, but that's just my opinion. Um, so we did have a question. Lori said, "Do the non-native species hamper the conservation of the Puerto Rican parrot or any
yeah.
conservation?"
So in this case, the answer is no. That now
Mhm,
I'm I know Tom White real well. He's one of the guys who's been working with Puerto Rico and forever. He's worried about non-native parrots because there are orange wings. There's I can't remember the
mhm,
full list, but there's conures, there's parakeets, there's Amazons flying around out there. He's worried about disease and he's worried about hybridization. And to me, for island parrots, especially these um, small islands with endemic species that are found only there, these non-natives scare me. But
yeah,
to date, the only place that we've had that issue, the echo parakeet, had a problem with beak and feather. And
mhm,
while they haven't nailed it down, it looks like the source of beak and feather was likely Indian ringnecks. But it's uncertain if the echoes got it in captivity when the researchers were working with ringnecks as a surrogate species and they got it there and then it was released, or if it was the true escaped ringnecks that live on the island that caused the problem. So even that one, which is a classic, these birds have a disease that came from non-native parrots. They still can't
mhm,
blame it on the birds that escaped or got out and got naturalized on Mauritius.
right. Okay. Um, all right, so let's talk about the problem. I mean, for those of us that love them, seeing them is the bonus. Seeing them and being able to experience that here and not having to pay the international airfare
There
is
you go.
amazing. But what kind of problems are we talking about, Don? I mean,
Okay,
go.
so the ecological, there we go. I just love that, and the that was out of the UK. Um, the the UK was trying to every now and then governments will decide that they need to do an eradication campaign, and when they do an eradication campaign, they usually botch it badly. They try and do it secretly,
Mhm,
and they don't tell people about it, and then all of a sudden somebody figures out what's going on, they get pissed off and they start making noise on social media, and that was one of the responses to that, which was funny. But so let me give a little before I talk about some of the biology problems with these things. I was asked by Pruitt Jones to write a chapter because he realized that everybody who works on these things basically comes from the perspective of they're bad, we just need to go out and prove it. So that's really the way most scientists kind of look at most non-native species. And he kind of came up to me and he didn't want to like stack. He realized he had so many people in this book that are have a negative opinion of the birds, but he in Chicago didn't find that they were causing any damage. So he realized
mhm.
he was going to write a book he was going to be like one of the only people in the book that wasn't just slamming the hell out of these birds. And so he came to Brightsmith and he goes, "Would you be interested in writing a chapter?" And I was like, and I got the idea that it was let's take a different look at them. So I tried to look at what are the documented impacts of these birds, not anything that could possibly happen, like every negative thing that could possibly happen, but
Right.
what have do we actually have evidence of? And the evidence was hard to find, in part because at the end of every article, all the guys would well, women as well, would list every possible thing that could go wrong, even though their study didn't find it. And you're like, and
Yeah.
there's still a disease risk, even though we found no disease problems, there's still a disease risk. And even though we have no evidence of people complaining, people could complain. And it's just like, oh, shut up.
Yeah,
So when I
it's the
boil,
worst case scenario. I feel like that's where we go with that,
yep,
or that's
yep.
where it leads. So, yeah.
Right. And so the well, let me finish this off. So the big ones that people worried about is you've got all these birds flying around, they're eating, they're nesting, they're going to be impacting something out there. And but the big issue that really saves these parrots from causing big impacts is that they live in the cities and the suburban areas, and most of your endangered species don't. They live out in the native habitats. So there was one study that found nuthatches, which are little, really cool little passerines that walk headfirst down the trees. In Europe, they found one spot where right in the like urban and semi-urban parks, the nuthatches were getting kicked out by the ringnecks, the parakeets. So okay, yay. One population area. They tried to repeat it in the UK, didn't work. They found no evidence of the parakeets causing trouble. And then a buddy out of mine out of Spain, one of the best, probably the best parrot biologist in the world right now, started studying a system in which there's something called the giant noctule bat. It's a big bat that lives, and a lot of them actually live in suburban and semi-urban areas, and it's an endangered species. And sure enough, the ringneck parakeets fight with them over holes. They throw them out of holes. I think there's evidence of one time of them actually killing a bat when it was kicked out. There's evidence that the populations might be declining because where the parakeets are coming in. So there is evidence that there's one species that's threatened globally that is being impacted negatively by parakeets. And that's all I could find.
Hmm. It doesn't seem like you can start a campaign with that. You could,
Except
but
there,
yeah,
right in
right.
those spots, and southern Spain, they are working. There are eradication campaigns for both monk, which are causing peri-urban agriculture damage, um, and the parakeets. Uh, but outside of that, the ecological. Now, there's a couple other possibilities. I talked a little bit about the one case where it looks like there's good evidence for the possibility of disease. There's another one in Cape parrots in South Africa have some diseases that likely, again, likely, and New Zealand,
Mhm.
diseases that are found in captive parrots, but there's no evidence that any of the released bird populations actually have the disease. So they can't say that here's the source of the disease and here's the impact. So again, it's
Right.
hard to connect those dots. But the one
Mhm.
funky one is hybridization,
Yeah.
because when you let them out, if they're overlapping, they start to hybridize with each other. So that's happened in South Texas, where our red crowns are kind of this mix of maybe some native and some non-native, but they're breeding with the Mexican redheads are breeding with red lords, and they're maybe breeding occasionally with double yellowheads, all sorts of stuff.
Yeah.
Green cheeked Amazons in Arizona? I've not seen green cheeks I didn't know of them in Arizona. They're in Texas and in Los Angeles for certain,
Mhm.
but I hadn't heard about
Hmm.
them in Arizona.
I don't know, Stacy, we'll have to look into that.
Yeah.
Um, so the parakeets, how if you had to rank them, how do we go, from most impactful in a negative way, or just most impactful? How would you rank them, Don,
Compared to non-parrots or within the parrots?
within the parrots?
So the ringneck globally is winning. They damage buildings, they damage agriculture, in a small way, like we've talked about. They have this 1.5 ecological impacts we talked about. So they
Mhm,
certainly are the one that is winning the race for the most impact. Monk
mhm,
parakeets come in behind it. There's a little bit of evidence out of Spain, huge, huge populations that are having some impact on agriculture. And what's really weird is in some areas, even where there's lots of them, they don't nest in power structures. And nobody's figured
mm,
that out. Some areas they cause all sorts of electrical system damage. Other places, none whatsoever. And that one,
interesting.
even after reading everything, I can't figure that one out. But they're number two, and then it's a long way before you get to number three. I mean,
Okay.
I would be hard pressed to choose a number three because they're. I know some guys lose some sleep when the sun comes up in South Texas because of the red lord sleeping, the redheads sleeping in their backyard, but that's about it that I can think of.
Yeah, I could probably live with that. That might be okay.
Yeah,
Ashley says that Quakers are perfect angels. There's no way that's the case.
of course.
So
Yeah,
yeah, well, you didn't even have to say that, Ashley. We got that covered.
exactly
Um,
right.
so let's talk about the ringnecks in Hawaii.
Uh, so this is an interesting one. Um, I actually talked to one of the biologists who's working on this system out there. And I should really call her a wildlife manager because I'm pretty sure she's trained in traditional wildlife management. So this is an eBird map in the top right corner of the picture here. And the red dots are how many places just generic bird watchers have reported ringneck parakeets in the last 30 days. So they're ringing the whole island, and you don't know how many people have been out there. And all the blue dots are older recordings of when the monk parakeet, the ringnecks were out there. So they are all over on the island. I haven't been there to see these birds. They're focused around the cities, but it does look like they're moving out into some of the more native habitats as well. But the big issue is big. The big issue is that Hawaii is really worried about feeding itself, food
Mhm,
sustainability, because they have to import everything and everything comes in on a boat, super expensive. So local farmers are really considered kind of a national treasure, a state treasure. And these parakeets are getting out, and it was really interesting to read the list of fruits that that they're damaging: rambutan and lychee and all of these really cool tropical fruits. But the number that's being touted, even in the invasive species literature for Hawaii, is local farmers are suffering a 10% loss in crop. Um, and 10% is 10%. But what's
right.
interesting to me is that it surprised me that this major agricultural impact is logging in at 10%. Um, but so there is an ongoing eradication campaign, but as that the second newspaper headline there showed, they were sneaking into people's like into the areas and so they're the way to control ringneck parakeets is you find a roost and you do something. The something is usually not very nice. They try and trap with mist nets, but it's really hard. Most of the time, they just end up shooting. I don't think they were poisoning, but it certainly is on the table when we're talking about
Mhm,
exotic species control. But the people were complaining. Look at how the one that says invasive, has subdued light and the bird
yeah.
doesn't look very pretty. But the one that says upset after hundreds of parakeets killed is a beautiful,
Mhm,
bright male with all of his color.
yeah.
Funny how we manipulate things to make our point. But
Mhm,
so these birds, because of the agricultural impact only, there's no evidence of any other impacts, although they put the damn disease one out there saying that humans are going to get sick from them. Um, but a 10% reduction in local farmers' productivity, and they're controlling them. It was really interesting to talk to the woman who was doing it, because she was just they're invasive, they're bad, and our job is to go out there and provide the information to validate the kill, more or less.
mhm. So we have a comment here that monk parakeets
Mhm.
actually support other species who take advantage of their unique nests.
Yeah, in Latin America, in their native ranges, there's a bunch of papers that talk those, about these big nests, and then you'll get jabberoos that will nest.
Mhm.
It's chicken and the egg. Which came first, the jabberoo or the monk parakeet?
Okay.
There's evidence of there an eagle and osprey nests will sometimes join with monk parakeet nests.
Mhm.
Oh, and there's one indication of one baby osprey that died of a disease, and it's possible that that one osprey chick could have gotten sick from the monk parakeets that lived underneath it, but they couldn't. It was completely circumstantial evidence again.
Yeah.
And this is the crap I was wading through to try and find real ecological impacts. So,
Well, and I think that's the thing because it's such an emotionally heated topic. I mean, anytime you've got, I mean, animals tug at people's heartstrings. It doesn't matter, you've got the group of people that this is going to be the people in Hawaii that are everybody's upset because of the killing of the parakeets versus the you look at the scientific, where are they really impacting, and then you've got the people who are trying to make those impacts look bigger than they truly are.
and
And I
that's
think,
what bothers me. That's the
yeah.
problem as the scientist. Be upfront. If it's a 10% loss in agriculture, society needs to make the decision. Do we want to get
Mhm.
rid of that 10%? And if society says, our democracy says, we want to get rid of these birds because of that, great. But don't lie to the people and tell them that they're going to get sick from these things when there's no evidence anywhere across 50 some countries that any single human being has gotten sick from these birds. Just don't bring that up.
Right. Right.
Because it's
Yeah,
just it ain't gonna happen.
when it's not a valid argument, I think that's where the issue comes in. If you can show me the evidence, you can show me that this is actually happening, or that, you
Hmm.
know, eh, yeah. And I think that's a big, big,
And the
um,
other thing that's usually missing from these is how much does it cost to control the birds? So they're hiring professionals to go out and do this, and how much is the economic damage? Because it seems often that the cost of doing an effective control campaign may actually be higher than the economic damage. And
mhm,
and so what I ask and the way I end this chapter is kind of, okay, guys, think about it. If you're going to control for economic reasons, you have to make an economic argument that it makes sense to try and control.
yeah,
If you're going to control for ecological reasons, make sure that the ecology is makes sense. Don't eh, eh, Is this going to happen? Is there any evidence from anywhere in the world suggesting that what you're predicting could actually happen? Is actually probable, even if it hasn't happened? Is there any indication that it really is a good type of probability? Because if not,
mhm.
why are we going out killing birds that we brought there, if the science behind it isn't sound?
Right, I mean, we have a comment here that in some countries, scientists gain financially from the eradication campaigns. I don't.
Okay, so that's really interesting, and I have great colleagues in different parts of the world, um, but there was something called Parrot Net in Europe. With the ringneck spreading across the entire continent, the EU had a funding campaign to look at the negative impacts of they funded scientists to go out and document the impacts of parakeets on everything, anything they could. And the problem there was because the funding was in response to this perceived negative problem, I don't think anybody felt comfortable just coming out and saying, wow, there isn't a problem here. um, Even these papers that had negative or really, really marginal, that had almost no findings or really, really marginal findings, were still making this big case that these parakeets were horrible. And I'm like, ah. And now is that a financial incentive? Blah blah blah. There is incentive because you get that money and it looks good for the university and you get to write papers and stuff. So I'm not accusing anybody of m- malpractice or being mislead, but they just followed this typical formula of papers where you list all the junk at the end.
Well, and I think we could probably find that there aren't any studies, if maybe a few, though, that go out and look at the positive impacts. And the word impact in itself, we that's one of those words that, oh, the what's the impact? And you kind of it makes you go like this when you say impact, and it's not, oh, what are the positive impacts of having naturalized parrots in your area? Like Diane said, they're beautiful in Long Island, and I remember walking out and being like, "Oh, that's so cool," and it's
S
but
so the other chapter that we wrote in the book is actually about that, and it talks about the social positive parts. It talks about the, chance for researchers to work on birds and learn more about parrots, etcetera. You're not exp you're not working with a population that's super endangered or gonna go extinct or anything. Um, and then there's a very controversial one that I don't want to weigh in on positive or negative, but there is the possibility of capturing non-native parrots for the pet trade
Mhm,
without impacting their native populations. I know that the people who love them in their local cities don't want them trapped out of their local cities to be sold to other people for pets in the home. It's very controversial, but it is certainly, from a conservation perspective, better than catching birds out of the wild in
mhm.
their native ranges and causing their native groups to go extinct. So there are a bunch of things, and my grad student Simon took the lead on that chapter. Um,
Huh.
and so that's in the book as well.
So we need to go out and get that, and so I think it's important that we look at it from all sides too. I mean, I don't have anybody planning to come on that is gonna talk about, that side of it so much. But I think, the negative side of things. But I think, it's worth seeing both sides, and I think it's so important that we're open to both sides, even though we're parrot lovers, and this is, we want them everywhere, but I think we just have to kind of take that step back and be open, to, and I think this book is a kind of a good place for that.
Yes, and I did really I'm the most I'm an outlier within the book as an author, but I really, really went for the weigh the evidence, find where there's real problems, not gloss them over, report where the real problems are, and report where the real problems aren't.
Mhm.
So I do my and I worked really hard to try and be balanced on that. I mean, I know what I want. I'd love to have monks coming to my backyard bird feeder. That's just my reality. But when I looked at this, and that's why I made a point, those giant nocturnal bats in Spain, they're a conservation problem. I mean, that
Yeah.
is a straight up legitimate conservation problem. But that's one. What was it? I looked at the numbers at one point, and
Uh-huh.
what was it? There's something like how many species are threatened?
Oh, wait.
1,312 species of vertebrates are threatened by non-native species, by invasive species globally.
Yeah.
Of those, only 1.5 of them are threatened by parrots, which again is 0.15% of all the species that are threatened by invasives are threatened
Mhm.
by non-native parrots. And you're like, is this worth hating on? Like,
Right.
there's so many other places like cats, pigs, rats,
Mhm.
pigeons. There's a lot of things on the list ahead of these parakeets.
So we're kind of at the end of our time, but I want to just really quickly talk about what can aviculture do, Dawn? Where do we go from there?
Um, okay, so the first thing is, and here's a couple of my points: preventing escapes and spreading the message not to release birds. A friend of mine in the UK was parrot sitting for somebody's ringneck. The owners got home, and within like a month, the bird escaped. And the woman said, I wasn't too broken up about it. I was going to release it anyhow within a few weeks. You're like, what? So that's not. And in Australia, there's all sorts of information on parrots being either released or escaped, and that's not okay. And I know that most of the people on here, if one of your birds escaped, you'd be probably close to devastated and doing everything to get it back. But it is important to make sure that we're keeping these birds, not getting them out into the wild. Um, and again, promoting the more balanced evaluation of risks and impacts. And if you happen to live in an area that has parrots and you hear of something like local removal, you should have the right to ask for, okay, why? A
Mhm.
real cost benefit analysis. How much does it cost you to do this? And how much are these birds costing us? And throw into the weight, into the balance, hey, there are positive impacts, and not being afraid to share the positive impacts. If they're saying that they're a threat to the environment, yeah, prove it. Show
Yeah.
me that there's some evidence. Um, and removal, if there's removals, the community needs to be engaged. And if the community, whatever that means, decides that it's a good thing to get rid of these birds or to keep them, okay, but don't all of a sudden, if all of a sudden you wake up and somebody's trying to take the parrots out and nobody ever bothered to talk about it, something's going on. And then there's the last one called on Brightsmith. Um, and we can try and figure out if there's, because I mean I've spoken about these things in the past. It's like, okay, I'm not afraid of looking anybody in the eye and say, okay, show me the evidence. And if you can't show any evidence, then yeah, what
Yeah.
you doing? And the people
So
in Wisconsin did actually listen. They really listened, and they were like, okay, it's clear that birds bred in captivity aren't the big risk, but imports are the risk. And we certainly, what they ended up being restrictive because they didn't want people catching wild ones to sell, then them
Mhm,
being sold and moved around in the state and released again. And that was their logic for not wanting them in the state. Um,
mhm.
and at least that made sense. that that argument made some sense. It wasn't just pure fantasy.
Right. Diane says, "Thank you, Dr. Brightsmith. Insightful presentation. She's looking to passing this along to Steve Baldwin from the Brooklyn Parrots. So,
Okay.
Diane, we need to get Dr. Brightsmith up to Long Island so he can see those beautiful monk parakeets outside the hotel, and we can do some on the ground work in Long Island. So,
And I
um,
I grew up in West Hempstead, so I'm no stranger to the area, and still have a sibling in Merrick. So
there we go. So, Diane, make a note of that. Diane will. See, that's the thing. And thank you for bringing your knowledge and the voice of reason to an unjust situation. The naturalized parrots deserve all the support they can get. So, thank you, Dawn. I want to
oh, that's
lots of
Madrid.
great.
Wait, I need to see that
Can we
El
make it bigger?
Ayuntamiento de Madrid asesina cotorras a tiros. So yeah, that's, I don't know if you speak Spanish, but yeah, the government of Madrid is assassinating parakeets with guns, a tiros, which is a ways it's like being shooting them, and that's really a complex situation in Madrid, and it's one of the best parrot scientists in the world who is working in that system, and he defends it. That's a complicated one and a very interesting case study, and one that, and again, I have to be balanced, otherwise I lose my credibility.
There we go.
And yep, yep. And this is a hot button issue.
Oh,
There are plenty of people on both sides of that. So that's a real cool one.
there's
There you
Jane.
go.
Jane
Yes.
says another insightful and interesting topic. Well, thank you so much, Don. I appreciate it whenever you're on with us, and I always learn so much, and it's nice to get the perspective outside of the companion parrot community, which there's all kinds of cool stuff happening there, but there's a lot happening outside that we need to also be aware of and support our animals that we love so much, but the ones that are out there. So, thank you again. And I'm sure I'll call you again
Oh,
and
and I put
we'll,
in a plug. If you look for Macaw Society, you can follow us on Facebook for certain.
oh, there we
And I
go.
think it's just Macaw Society. on Facebook, and you can follow us there. My wife Gabby, our parrot nesting ecologist extraordinaire, puts a lot of hard work into that as well. So
All right. Well, we will definitely do that. So the Macaw Society, follow them on Facebook. And Gabby does wonderful work as well. We've had Gabby on before with you. So, all right. Thank you guys. Thank you all for being here.
thanks so much.
Next week, I will have Chris Touchton from Lori's Limited. And we're going to talk about all things Lori, which is fascinating to me because they're such different little creatures. And then
Yeah.
just for any of you that tune into Coffee with the Critters with Lara Joseph, um, I will be joining Lara on this Sunday, the 10th at 9 a.m. Eastern. Don't forget to set your clocks next, set them forward, spring
Oh yeah.
forward tomorrow night. But I will be on there with Lara, and we're going to be talking about what does that behavior mean. So should be fun. I always enjoy talking to her. So thank you guys again, and I will see you next week. And again, we'll be talking to Chris Touchton about Lori's. Take care, Don. Everybody have a good week. Bye bye.